In this video, I'm going to show you how to build a $51 Cazur and Ukkima commander deck. Let's get started. Total cost of this deck was just under $51 as of the day of recording. Prices were checked using mtgstocks.com. This deck is 1DH legal, meaning all the cards in the deck are $1 or under, with the exception of the commanders, which can be up to $5. Do note that prices fluctuate, so they may be above or below where you see them at in this video. Ukkima is a 3 to cast 2/2 that's unblockable, and it says when Ukkima leaves the battlefield, it deals X damage to target player, and you gain X life, where X is its power. We are going to mostly key in on that unblockable feature. We're going to have a few cards that trigger. We have 7 cards that trigger when we deal combat damage to a player. So we kind of want to keep Ukkima unopposing, keep it kind of small, and just get in for little bits here and there, mostly getting value, drawing cards off of dealing damage to players. The main strategy of this deck is to get +1/+1 counters on our creatures using Cazur. So Cazur is a 3/3 that reads, whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, put a +1/+1 counter on that creature. So you can see Cazur kind of feeds Ukkima, making Ukkima bigger and bigger. We have 21 cards that synergize with the +1/+1 strategy. So we kind of want to use Ukkima to get value, get our engine going, and then Cazur to finish our opponents off. To get there, we are going to start out by talking about the Accelerants, the cards that help ramp us into those cards that help finish off our opponents. And we have Search for Tomorrow, Rampant Growth, and Farseek, which all help us get extra lands to the battlefield early. We also have Sakura Tribe Elder, Diligent Farmhand, and Embodiment of Spring, which sacrifice themselves to get extra lands to the battlefield early. And then we have the Font of Fertility, which is similar to the creatures, but is an enchantment that sacrifices itself, and good old Cultivate to get 1 land to the battlefield early and an extra land to our hand. Next we have Rishkar Pima Renegade, which cares about +1/+1 counters and turns all of our creatures with counters into dorks, as well as the Fertilid, which helps us to get extra lands to the battlefield early. If we can somehow get extra counters on the Fertilid, we can get additional value out of him. Do note that this deck is very color hungry. There are several cards that have 3 pips, either 3 green, 3 blue, or 3 black. As you're fetching these lands out of your deck, try to be mindful of that as you play so that you're always able to cast the cards in your hand. In playtesting, I only had 1 game where I was unable to play all the cards I wanted. I had a card with 3 green pips I wanted to play, as well as a second card with 2 green pips, and I was unable to do both of them in one turn. Aside from that, I was always able to play the cards I wanted. However, I was always being mindful of getting the right colors onto the battlefield as I was building up my mana base. Next up, we're going to talk about the cards specific to our game plan. We have 18 of them. To start off, we have Merfolk Skydiver, Simic Ascendancy, and Evolution Sage, which all help us get extra +1/+1 counters onto our creatures. We can proliferate with the Sage as well as the Skydiver, and then Simic Ascendancy can just help us win the game by getting 20 growth counters on it. If we've added 20 +1/+1 counters to our creatures while this has been on the battlefield, we are just going to win at the beginning of our next upkeep. So that can help apply some pressure to our opponents. Also gives us a nice mana sink. We also have Pharrell of the Wholeclade, which can double the number of counters on a permanent. Corpsejack Menace, which doubles the number of +1/+1 counters that are added to our creatures. And then we have Zagana Utopian Speaker, which can help us draw cards, gives our +1/+1 counter creatures trample, and can also become an 8/8 on its own. Loyal Guardian is doubly good here as we have 2 commanders, and it's a lieutenant, so it triggers when one of our commanders is on the battlefield, therefore making the commander tax not as taxing on us. We also have the Verder's Gearhulk as well as Vorapede, which are just mid-sized creatures that become bigger, especially once we can get more counters on them. Vorapede is an exceptionally good attacker and blocker as it has vigilance as well as trample. Necropolis Regent and Cazur are very similar in that they trigger when we deal damage to our opponents with our creatures. Necropolis Regent is a card that needs answering right away by our opponents, otherwise our board state is just going to get out of hand. And then Plaxcaster Frogling can give Shroud to any creature we have with a +1/+1 counter. Inspiring Call helps protect our board and draw us a bunch of cards, giving all of our creatures with +1/+1 counters indestructible until end of turn. And then we have Ukkima, which is going to trigger off of dealing combat damage and going to get big on its own. As I said before, we want to leave this smaller. It's going to draw some hate just being unblockable, so we don't want to draw hate from our opponents using this. We just want to get as much value from it as we can. If it gets bigger from dealing combat damage, so be it. Rancor is great to put on Ukkima if you're getting into a commanding position. Otherwise, you can put it on another creature you want to get in for combat damage with. Gives that creature +2/+0 and trample. And then if it would leave the battlefield or go to the graveyard, you can return it back to your hand. Mirror Shield gives one of our creatures hexproof. Kaya's Ghost Form protects a creature from death or exile. And then Ring of Evos Isle can give a creature it's equipped to hexproof. And it also gives that creature +1/+1 counters as long as it's a blue creature at the beginning of our upkeep. Then we're going to talk about cards that interfere with our opponent's game plan. We have Reality Shift, Victim of Night, and Exclude to deal with our opponent's creatures, as do Murder, Ravenous Chupacabra, and Murderous Cut. Death Sprout kills off one of our opponent's creatures and gets us a land to the battlefield. Slice in Twain can remove an opponent's artifact or enchantment, as does Nature's Claim. Putrefy can get rid of creatures or artifacts. Sultai Charm can destroy a monocolored creature, an artifact, or an enchantment. In a pinch, you can use it to draw 2 cards and discard a card. And we also have Golgari Charm, which destroys enchantments or gives all creatures -1/-1. And if it's sitting in your hand when somebody plays a board wipe, you can regenerate each of your creatures. Our own board wipes, we have Extinguish All Hope, which destroys all non-enchantment creatures. Most of the creatures you want to destroy are non-enchantment anyway, and the enchantment ones that are played in Commander typically have indestructible anyhow. Deathbringer Regent wipes the board and leaves us with a 5/6 flyer, and then Flood of Tears bounces all permanents to their owner's hand, and if we had 4 bounced, we can put a permanent from our hand directly onto the battlefield. Next up, we're going to talk about the cards that provide us consistency. We have 16 of them. Coiling Oracle and Growth Spiral both draw us a card and potentially ramp us. We also have Mythos of Brokos, which tutors a permanent to our graveyard should we pay blue and black, and then we can put 2 permanents from our graveyard into our hand, so recur a couple cards. Mole Drifter, which draws us 2 on entering. Don't be afraid to evoke this, as it can get you a draw 2 on turn 3 if you don't have anything else going on. And then Fallen Shinobi, which is exceptionally good with our commander, Ukkima, who's unblockable, as you can ninjutsu this guy out. Doesn't have to be with Ukkima, but makes it a little bit easier to trigger. And if you get in for combat damage with the Fallen Shinobi, you get to exile 2 cards from an opponent's library, so not necessarily consistency from our own deck, but gives us card advantage. And then you get to play those cards for free until end of turn. So if you know you're going to get in for combat damage with the Fallen Shinobi, try not to play a land that turn so that you can potentially play a land off of your opponent's deck, just giving you a little bit extra card advantage. We also have Underworld Connections, Colossal Majesty, and Kumena's Awakening, all enchantments that provide us card draw turn over turn. Rogue's Gloves, Reconnaissance Mission, and Bread for the Hunt all give us draws when we deal combat damage to our opponents. You do need to have +1/+1 counters if you want Bread for the Hunt to trigger. And Reconnaissance Mission does have cycling, although in playtesting I never had the opportunity or wanted to play it for its cycling cost, as I always had something else going on. Primal Empathy is going to give us a draw at the beginning of our turn as long as we have the creature with the greatest power or tied for greatest power. Otherwise, we get to put +1/+1 counters on our creatures. Fathom Mage draws us a card every time it gets a +1/+1 counter, and it has Evolve. So easy to get +1/+1 counters on it with Evolving, putting bigger creatures out. But if not, you have lots of ways to put +1/+1 counters on your Fathom Mage. And then Sphinx of Magosi, just a big 6/6 flyer mana sink that draws you cards and gets bigger the longer it stays on the table. Find/Finality can recur us 2 creatures or be a small to mid-sized board wipe, allowing us to put extra counters on something. And then Painful Truth is going to draw us 3 cards as long as we pay a blue, green, and black into it. Next up, we're going to talk about the lands. We are running 41 of them in this deck. Halimar Depths is going to help smooth out our draws. Grim Backwards gives us a sacrifice outlet, and Mortuary Mire helps us to put a creature from our graveyard on top of our library so that we can play it again. Land of War Reborn allows us to get +1/+1 counters onto our creatures. Rogue's Passage helps us to get in for combat damage. And then Blighted Woodland helps us to fetch lands from our library to the battlefield. Like I said earlier, try to be mindful of your mana base as you're fetching them. Other lands that help us fetch lands from our library, we have Myriad Landscape, Terramorphic Expanse, and Evolving Wilds. Command Tower and Opulent Palace give us all 3 of our colors. We have Dimir Aqueduct, Dimir Guildgate, Dismal Backwater, Jawar Isle Refuge, and Submerged Boneyard to give us blue-black. Green-blue comes from Simic Growth Chamber, Simic Guildgate, Thornwood Falls, and the Woodland Stream. And then we have Golgari Guildgate, Golgari Rot Farm, Jungle Hollow, and Temple of Malady for black-green. As for basics, we are running 8 forests, 6 islands, and 2 swamps. There you can see the mana curve. The average CMC of this deck was 3.13, so quite low compared to most of the decks in my playgroup. If you enjoy putting +1/+1 counters on your creatures, swinging in for big amounts of damage, getting lots of value off of those swings, this is the deck for you. Give it a go and let me know how you liked it. Here are a few cards I would consider if I were to go above that $1 price point. If you want to see some more ideas, check out the link in the description below. Better yet, share your thoughts in the comments what card you would upgrade with. That way, others can see your brilliant ideas and alter to their liking. If you liked the video, you should give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing. If you do, make sure you ring the bell so you don't miss any of the new weekly content from Budget Commander. Otherwise, you can check out the video in the top right or either of the playlists on the bottom.